Good morning or good afternoon, depending upon where you are in the United States here, but welcome to our coffee break titled Surging Costs in 2025, Strategies Your Firm Needs Now. What prompted this coffee break? Well, I tell you, according to Citi Bank, in their latest survey, expenses for law firms increased 8.5% in the first 6 months of this year.
Mammogram truck will be on site from 7 a.m. to 1 p.m.
Pretty alarming increase there. Good news is revenues grew at 10.8%. So again, even though expenses are rising and mostly attributable to, and this is probably no surprise to anyone, IT costs associated with AI and the staff to support that. So, and we're going to talk about that a little bit in a little bit further on in the presentation, and even more in October, and I'll get to that point in a second. But a lot of firms are paying for AI and the staff, plus not realizing any of the benefits that AI will eventually bring to a law firm operation. So that being said, we're going to get started. Just so everyone knows what we do, we are consultants for law firms focusing on office and administrative services, information governance, and records. We're unbiased. We're not affiliated with any provider. We don't sell any type of software. The only thing we offer is our expertise. And we assist firms in improving these areas, either in-house or if they're outsourced. Today, we're going to talk about different markets, different areas that we work in, and what's going on with that market, what kind of increases are firms experiencing, and then strategies on how to avoid these types of increases or increase the savings that you could realize by looking at these expenses. I'm joined today by Ken Purce, who is our partner when it comes to legal research contracts. Ken, how are you doing there today?
Great, Rob.
Okay. And Deanna Crawford, one of our consultants, who actually manages our post-contract monitoring and maintenance for approximately 50 clients. That's where we stay involved after contracts in place, after we do the RFP and negotiation, and she helps to make sure that the service providers are doing what they're supposed to do, invoicing is correct, scorecards are delivered, and keeps everything running along the way it should. So, Deanna, how you doing this morning?
I'm good.
Good. Okay, today we're going to focus on legal research and AI and how that dovetails with legal research and what we have, what you should expect or what you should be seeing there. We're going to talk about offsite storage, and we're going to introduce Matty. I'll get to Matty in a couple minutes here, but pretty excited about it, and it's going to help make your life easier. And then, because we had so much content and a lot of great questions coming in, what people were asking, what we wanted to cover, we decided to schedule a follow-up webinar, coffee break, on October 14th at noon, where we're going to delve into the IG, information governance, digital migration, which is huge out there, administrative services, outsourcing, output, and office supplies. So we had to break into two parts because of the amount of information we want to provide to you. So some of the questions we got, and don't be afraid to submit new questions, may pertain to these other services. We'll try to address them today. If not, then we'll address them on the 14th, and you'll receive follow-up invite to that, okay? First 25 people that registered should have received yesterday your Starbucks gift card for a cup of coffee. And the signed Mattern method books will be going out next week. So that being said, grab your Starbucks and we'll get started here. Okay, I just want to take a step back and talk about some basics. And this is whether Mattern works with you or you're working on your own. But these are the things that we like to bring to the table to make sure that people are focused on. And to keep in mind when you are negotiating contracts, when you're taking a look at what you're spending or trying to renew or whatever, Contract terms, in our opinion, are more important than the pricing that you receive. They could determine, you may get great pricing, but if the contract terms are horrendous, you'll regret that throughout the life of the contract. So again, pricing is important, no doubt about it, but contract terms are equally so. And Deanna is going to really touch upon this when it comes to offsite record storage contracts. Renewals. Okay, if you just get a renewal from your current incumbent service provider, I tell you, you're going to end up, in some cases, spending more without negotiating. They'll come through and think, hey, listen, you're not going out for competitive bids. We're just going to give you a renewal pricing at our current rates. When we handle a renewal, working with one of our clients, we're looking at about getting half the savings of a competitive RFP process. So if you really want to drive pricing, drive your costs, you have to go into a competitive situation. If you don't, and you're happy with what your current provider is doing for you, then a renewal is fine, but realize that you're leaving some money on the table. And not only money, but also improvement in terms. Just because you enter a competitive process and you talk to other vendors doesn't mean you have to make a change. We'll be dealing with a client and they'll say, oh, geez, I don't want to talk to other vendors. I have no intention of making a change. Well, that doesn't always come true. Now, I could tell you that if I had $1 for everyone to say, hey, listen, we'll go out and look at other service providers, but we're not making a switch, and they did, I'd probably be on a beach somewhere in the Caribbean. So just because you go through a competitive process, you don't have to make a change. A lot of firms do. Once a contract's in place, and we see this all the time, you got to make sure you're monitoring the invoices and the reporting that the service provider is giving you. Geez, it's all contract price and it's all done by a computer. It's going to be correct. Again, Deanna is going to talk about this and more when we talk about offsite record storage. But I tell you, we've seen, again, service providers add additional charges. Okay, they'll increase the contractual rates without you even knowing, even though they're not allowed to for a period of a year or they're fixed or whatever. So you got to monitor your invoices. Offsite record storage, they send you a Schedule A. We have situations where the offsite provider increased the per mouth fees. That if you terminate the contract, the per mouth fees would increase. And that was not a contractual change. They just put that on your Schedule A. You pay your first monthly invoice under that Schedule A, theoretically you agree to it. So monitor the invoices, the reporting that they should be providing you, okay? And be careful of them creating new charges without your permission. And that should be some language in your contract too. And last but not least, we'll work with firms that, hey, we're going to outsource this because really we don't want to manage it anymore. Still have to manage it. Okay, it's a different type of management, and the management should be spelled out in the contract. However, it's not like you can wash your hands and walk away. Still have to manage the service provider. So these are a couple of basics that I just want to get out there. And regardless of the contract, regardless of the service, regardless whether you're doing this yourself, you're hiring someone to do it, these are some basics that you got to keep in mind. Okay, legal research. Ken, educate our audience.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it. Hope everybody's having a good day. Thanks for taking a little bit of time to spend with us. So I as a general proposition, I just want to say this. In the 30 years I've been in this industry, 20 years on the inside of this industry, I was vice president of sales at Lexis, and 10 years, the last 10 years where I've done nothing but negotiate contracts for law firms. I will say that this is by far the most dynamic period of time, and I think the most challenging period of time that I've seen law firms have to encounter, whether it comes to renewals of their existing provider or considering switching to a new provider. The market has just changed incredibly quickly, especially in the last 2 years. So the biggest driver of all of this, from a market standpoint, has obviously been AI and the platforms that both Westlaw and Lexis have rolled out. Now, I'll refer to Westlaw and Lexis primarily through this conversation. The same holds true for Bloomberg, basically any of the other legal research, online legal research providers that your firm has. All of the providers have developed AI tools, and all of those tools are being pushed very aggressively into the marketplace. But what's happened is, recently within the market, and it's really been an unusual circumstance. Typically, the platforms that the vendors use, Westlaw and Lexis, don't change all that often. They develop a platform. It usually runs for a 4 or 5 year period. They'll develop another platform and with an upgrade opportunity there. But what we've seen within Westlaw and Lexis specifically over the last 2 years is just a rapid increase and modification of their platforms to the point where it's really impacting pricing and overall market rates that firms are seeing. So many of your firms, I'm sure, if you're a Westlaw firm, may have adopted the Precision AI platform. It's been in the market for about 2 years now. Lo and behold, a month ago, Westlaw just announced that they are no longer going to be selling Precision to new clients. They're going to be selling their new platform called Advantage. It's an AI platform as well. They've also gone ahead and done some bundling with co-counsel and some other things. So the fact that firms may have absorbed a really significant increase in cost to go from the prior Westlaw platform to Precision in the last 12 months doesn't mean that you're not going to be asked to absorb another large increase going from Precision to Advantage. And we'll get more into ways to combat that increase, but it is a very unusual circumstance for this industry that the platforms are changing this quickly. There's also been a very strong push to all-inclusive platforms, all-inclusive packages. So this includes the AI platform. It includes much, much larger content sets than firms typically would have had in the past. And it includes AI drafting tools like co-counsel for Westlaw and Protege for Lexis. Now, the all-inclusive packages are being positioned as something that's more cost-effective. However, firms really have to do their due diligence on these all-inclusive packages to determine, one, whether the content is really necessary for the firm, and two, whether the number of seats are necessary. So in a really specific example, co-counsel, which is Westlaw's drafting tool, will be presented to firms in an all-inclusive package with firm-wide access. So every attorney, every paralegal in the firm will have access to co-counsel. Well, the reality is not every attorney or paralegal in the firm may need access to co-counsel. It's going to be presented as all you can eat, and that's your option. The reality is there are other options available. You can certainly look at the content. You can certainly look at the number of seats. Generally speaking, there is a much higher potential for firms to overpay now than I've ever seen before. Part of that is due to the fact that many firms went to the AI upgrade, 12 to 18 months ago, absorbed that 25% increase, and now are going to be asked to absorb another very large increase with the change in platform to Advantage or the additional packages that the vendors are going to be pushing. So it is a very, very dynamic period of time within this industry. I strongly encourage firms, as Rob said earlier, not to simply automatically renew. We'll talk about that in a minute, but it's more important than ever. And then the final point I wanted to make about the market overview is that there has really been a paradigm shift between Lexis and Westlaw from a competitive standpoint. Traditionally, Westlaw has been able to command a higher price. Part of that has been due to the fact that they have perpetuated the belief that they are a superior product to Lexis in this particular case, and firms are willing to pay a premium. I will say that our observations over the last 2 years is that the Lexis AI platform has been very well received, and in many instances is considered superior to where Westlaw is today. I will put the caveat out there that certainly that's going to change. It's a full-on arms race right now. So that current situation may change quickly. But the fact that there is not a serious or realistic gap between feature, functionality, content between Westlaw and Lexis any longer really gives firms the opportunity to see much larger savings in their next contract. So I mentioned this because many firms renew with whatever provider they have at that moment, simply out of inertia, simply out of a preference that your attorneys have for the current product. All of that makes sense, and all of that is a relevant factor. However, given what's happened in the marketplace in the last 2 years, I don't think that should just be done without the due diligence aspect of looking at the non-incumbent vendor. So
Hey, Ken,
yeah, I'm sorry, Rob.
quick question. I think a couple of years ago, all you heard about was Bloomberg, that they were going to take over the market, put both these companies out of business. Where are they at?
Bloomberg has great question. Thanks for bringing that up. Bloomberg has definitely attempted to make itself more of a player to the larger market. Traditionally, Bloomberg was of more interest to firms that had specific practice areas like tax or employment law, very specific areas. Bloomberg has certain content that are must-haves in those areas. What they've done in the last couple of years, though, is try to position themselves as an alternative to Westlaw and Lexis. That's not really turned out to be the case. Firms typically maintain their Westlaw and Lexis contracts. They may add a Bloomberg contract, but I will say from a negotiation standpoint and in the terms of the contract, as you had mentioned earlier, Bloomberg contracts can be very onerous. And I will tell you that they are in a position right now where they have been able to dictate terms. So for a firm that does not have a Bloomberg online contract, I'm not saying not to do that, but I would be very careful about your starting point with them. But at this point, Westlaw, Lexis are still the main providers. We are going to look at something like a Harvey, which has become more and more a player within the market. Lexis and Harvey have entered into a partnership where Lexis is going to provide some of their content for Harvey. I do expect that partnership to expand as time goes on. Where that goes, we'll see, whether it's a full-out acquisition or just the partnership remains. So yeah, the landscape has changed, but at this point, it is still primarily the Westlaw Lexis show.
Okay.
So the kinds of increases that we are seeing are really significant. It is not uncommon. These are very real numbers. That if a firm is going from a non-AI platform to an AI platform with either of these vendors, you're going to be looking at a 25 to even 50% increase, depending on what you have today. The year-over-year annual increases during the term of the contract are probably going to be 8%. They may ask for more than that, but 8% is kind of market average that we see right now. If you are just looking to renew your current content and functionality, content and platform, no changes to what you have today, you're going to look at a 10% increase from this contract to the next one, minimum, and at least 7% year-over-year increases during the term of the contract. Now, those numbers were unheard of 2-3 years ago. Typically, what we would see is maybe a 5% increase from one contract to the next, and then during the term of that contract, you'd see 3% year-over-year increases, definitely 5% or below. Those days are long gone. And it is all of this, the percentage increases, the percentage increase going from one contract to the next, all of this underscores the need for the firm to really be very aware of where your rate is relative to market prices today. Because what's going to happen when you look at that upgrade or when you look at the new platform from either of these vendors, they're going to try to assign their 25, 30, 40% increase onto your current rate, regardless of whether you're over market or not right now. So we'll get to this in a second, but the idea of knowing where your rate is relative to market is probably the most important thing a firm can do to combat these increases, and we'll talk about that in a second. As I said, many firms have already gone from Westlaw's platform to their AI precision platform and experienced this 25, 30, 40% increase in the last 18 months. you will be, if your firm hasn't been contacted yet, you will be looking at that again when they start to talk to you about Advantage. And I will just say as a side note, again, this underscores the need for firms to do true due diligence on these products to determine whether there is enough of a change to warrant the increase, and that there is the true functionality that the vendors are talking about, to warrant the firm upgrading again so quickly. So finally, what can you do to combat these increases? As I said, you really have to benchmark your current rate. You have to know where your rate is relative to market, because the whole discussion that you're going to have in the negotiation is going to be based off of something that's Westlaw will refer to it as an RPA. That stands for revenue per attorney per month. Lexis will refer to it as a CPA. That means cost per attorney per month. But basically, both of them use the same measure. They're going to take your flat monthly rate and they're going to divide it by the number of attorneys in the firm, and that gives them the cost per attorney per month. That is the internal language that both vendors use to determine whether a contract's profitable for them. So you, in your negotiations with Westlaw and Lexis, really need to speak in terms of RPAs or CPAs. It really doesn't help the process to speak in terms of monthly or annual amounts. You really have to break it down to the per attorney cost. And the reason why that's important is because you have to be able to have some basis to push back on some of these really large increases that the vendors are going to ask for. So if you've done benchmarking and you understand that your firm's rate may be 20% over market today, you have a better argument to make with that vendor that you should not absorb the kind of increase they're going to be asking for to go to AI or to upgrade a platform. Assessing the value of the bundles is incredibly important now. I have never seen an instance in the 30 years I've been in this industry where firms are being forced into bundles that are frankly just overkill for them, or forced into bundles that have more seats than are required and necessary for the firm. So you have to look at both the content, and that can get tricky, especially for folks on this call that are not users. But you have to understand the content, and the way you do that is to look at your usage reports on your existing Westlaw or Lexis contract to determine what the firm is actually using, and you need to look at the number of seats that you want. Most of you realize that Westlaw and Lexis are going to price based on the number of attorneys in the firm, regardless of whether they're part-time, of counsel, whatever it may be. They're going to take that full number. But in areas like drafting, co-counsel, for instance, currently firms are still able to purchase a set number of seats and don't have to go enterprise-wide. They're probably not going to present that to you when they present the bundle. They're going to come at you with an enterprise-wide offer that could just drive the price through the roof. So really dig into the value of the bundle, and I encourage you to push back on your representatives and ask them very clearly, what can we do if we don't want all these elements included in this? They're not going to make it easy to unbundle it, but it can be done. And then finally, the one point, and Rob touched on this earlier, there should never be a renewal without due diligence on the non-incumbent vendor. So I know some of these firms on this call are going to be dual provider. That's fine. You can still do this the same way. But many of the firms are going to be sole provider firms, and you have to look at the non-incumbent vendor during the renewal period. These contracts are usually 3 to 5 years long. You don't have a lot of opportunity to do that during the term of the contract, obviously. So you need to do it ahead of time. And the reason for that is twofold. One, pricing for a new contract to a firm, for Westlaw or Lexis, if you are a new subscriber, it's likely you can generate better rates than if you are a current subscriber with a set amount of revenue already coming to that vendor. It is very difficult to reduce that existing revenue below what it is today at a renewal period. That's one reason. You may find, as Rob alluded to earlier, that that a conversion to a new vendor is not nearly as difficult as you may have thought. And I will tell you that is the case nowadays with West and Lexis. And the other reason why you want to do that is because if your incumbent vendor does not believe that you folks are doing anything competitive, they have zero reason to reduce the rate. They have all the confidence in the world to maintain the 10, 15, 20% increase on a straight renewal, let alone the cost of the upgrade. If you don't introduce competition into the process, you're probably adding easily 10 to 15% in costs on your contract without batting an eye. So there's a lot going on within this industry right now. As I said, it's by far the most dynamic period of time. And I've never seen a period where there is more potential exposure for firms to overpay. The rates that we see, the variances that we see in cost for similar size firms with similar content and similar platforms is wider than ever. So there are firms paying multiples more than similarly situated firms with the same content and platform. So due diligence is very important right now. And I encourage all of you to push back and dig deeply into the bundles. Certainly get your benchmarking, which we're happy to benchmark any firm's contract rate for them at no cost. But those are vital elements to make sure that you're in the best position in this negotiation.
Okay, a lot of great points there, Ken. Really quickly, I just want to talk about consolidation. That's another big strategy out there. Really quick, we got
Sure. Yeah, consolidation. So if you're a dual provider firm, it is difficult for dual provider firms to drop one of the vendors. I would encourage the due diligence in that area. There are certain factors. If you're an Am Law firm and you wanted to drop Lexis, then you won't have access to certain things like Law 360 because of their policies. If you are a smaller firm, not an Am Law firm with a dual provider, consolidating to one provider is definitely an avenue to look at. Obviously, it's going to have a significant impact on your cost and expense if you can drop one. The duplication across vendors is expansive. The product and the content is very similar on both sides. So dropping to one provider is probably not as difficult as firms may believe it is.
Okay. I tell you, tremendous amount of good points. If anybody has any questions for Ken, please submit them through chat, and we'll try to work them in later on. If not, then we'll follow up with you on those. One last piece, cost recovery. We didn't. If anybody wants any information on the cost recovery aspect of legal research, just submit a question, submit a request, and we'll share what we have. Still, a lot of firms are still recovering costs in that area. So, moving on, we got Deanna, who's going to talk about legal research.
Offsite.
Oh, Offsite. I'm sorry. I got legal research on my mind. Sorry about that.
I just got very educated on legal research, though. That was good, Ken.
You can do it.
Okay. So
for Offsite, while you're getting the presentation back up, just to give you a little background, I worked at Iron Mountain for 9 years, and I worked at Access for 2 years. I've been with Mattern for 2 years as well, so I have a lot of background in the Offsite arena. But what we're really seeing in Offsite specifically is the industry as a whole is really, they're doing a transition, right? So in the past, it used to be all about the physical storage of the boxes. That's where they made all their money. That's what they relied on. And now what we're seeing is that as the market is trending, we're sending less boxes to storage, and we're starting to image more. We're starting to go digital. So what they're doing is they're trying to diversify their offerings as well to stay up with the market. So you've probably seen some, advertisements coming from your storage vendors that are about different offerings that they have, different service lines that they have. And that's their way of creating those service lines and revenue for the future as the box goes away. Now, do I think the box will ever completely go away? Probably not. There's always going to be some documents that you need to retain, but as we are seeing, renewals come up and our customers trying to exit the offsite storage, I think what we're noticing is that renewals are coming in much higher than they ever were before. And it's interesting when Ken was saying the percentages, what we used to say is CPI or 3 to 5%. Now we're seeing escalators of 7 to 8% on renewals when they come through. Services are around 41%, which is very high. When you talk about the services, I'm talking about the transportation, the retrievals, the refiles. And then the storage as a whole, that's just the physical box sitting on the shelf. we're looking at an average storage increase of 39%. And we've had some real life examples recently. That's your average, but there was just one firm that ended a 3-year contract and they got a 25% increase on their storage. That firm was up in the Northeast. We also had one in the Midwest who had a storage increase of 18%. But what was interesting about them is if they only looked at that single line of storage, they saw an 18% increase, but they had a minimum storage fee that drastically increased. That was over almost $1,400 per month. So when we think about these increases and these renewals that are coming up, you need to make sure that you're not just looking at one line of that Schedule A that's coming, but all of the different services that are on that Schedule A. As Rob mentioned earlier, we consistently see new fees that are coming in. Some of those that we've seen recently are around reboxing, relidding. Now we have something that's called repairing the box because so many people have opted out of the reboxing. So again, you're going to continue to see those. We also have noticed they are now charging for how you're paying your invoice. So in the past, you could pay it, ACH, you could do check, or you could do credit card. Now, if you're not doing ACH, you have additional fees. So they have credit card fees and check processing fees. Some have not rolled that out, but I foresee that to be on all the service providers in the next few months, if not the next year. So those are the kind of the things we're seeing in the market right now, overall for the industry. When we talk specifically about strategies, really, we don't want you to let your contract lapse. So be proactive. And when we say be proactive, I'm not talking 2 months before your contract is up for renewal. You should pull your contract today and see when the renewal is. Your Schedule A may not be the same date as your contract. So make sure that you look at that as well. You might get a renewal at the beginning of a quarter, but your contract was signed elsewhere in the year. So go by your contract dates, and you need to plan about a year in advance. And you think, wow, that's way far out. But when you think about a renewal or moving providers, you have to give them notice. Sometimes that's 30, 60, sometimes even 90 days notice. You also have to have time to gather responses if you're going to go out to bid or negotiate with your current vendor. And you also need to plan time to move inventory if you decide to do that. Now, sometimes we can negotiate, with them, how many boxes they're going to move at a time, or, they can hold rates during that, but there's no guarantee of that. So the earlier you start, the better it's going to be for your organization. So number 2, if you can, destroy. It has to be in line with your retention policy. So if you don't already have an IG policy in place, you need to make sure that you are focused on that. And once you have that in place, you need a very consistent approach. And what that means is you can't have one older attorney who says, I want to keep everything, and the newer ones say, oh, I'm fine with disjoin. Because if you don't have a consistent approach, you really are opening yourself up to risk. If you have it, you have to produce it, which means that even if it met your retention schedule, you could have gotten rid of it 2 years ago, but you didn't. Now you still have to produce that for the case. So again, once you have that IG policy in place, destroy. What that also is going to do from a cost standpoint is it's going to reduce your overall storage month over month. So you're not paying for boxes that you don't need to keep any longer. When you look at forecasting, I know a lot of people are in budgeting right now. I'm getting a lot of emails around, how can I forecast for next year? What are the anticipated costs? Look at your contract to see what your escalators are, if there's any built in. If there's not, that's a little bit of a concern, but we'll hit that in a minute. But really look at how many boxes can you destroy over the next year, and what are the costs that's going to be associated with that? Because sometimes we get into IG policies and we think, oh, let's go ahead and destroy, but then we get that price tag because you're having to add up the retrievals, the destruction cost, handling. It ends up being quite a bit of money. So make sure you're putting that as part of your budget for the following year, and even budget out for the next 2, 3, 4 years. So that way, you know those numbers, lining up with your IG policy to make sure that you're forecasting for those destruction costs. When you look at your renewal, like Ken said, if they have no reason to lower your rates or keep them the same or just increase them by like 3 to 5, they're going to take advantage of the situation. So like Rob mentioned, even if you don't think you want to leave your current vendor, at least create a competitive situation. I've seen a lot of firms be very nervous about that because they see this huge number of what it would be to terminate. But I can tell you that there are quite a few vendors in the marketplace that are willing to pay those fees on the firm's behalf in order to absorb those to make that move.
Hey,
So,
Deanna,
yes.
is it safe to say that if you do this correctly, create a competitive situation and switch vendors, your firm should never have to write a check for perm out fees?
Correct.
Okay.
They should be reimbursed.
They should all be reimbursed. Your costs should be completely covered. So we
Correct.
hear about firms writing a check of 150,000 to this vendor or whatever. You should never have to do that. The vendor receiving the boxes should be doing that or reimbursing you for that. So
Correct. Yeah, and when you talk about the termination fee, sometimes you'll have an account closing fee. Sometimes it will be different items on your Schedule A, which would be your handling, your retrieval, and your permanent withdrawal. Sometimes there's also doc access fees. So there's a lot that goes into an actual termination. But the first thing is determining that contract end date, because if you lapse and you go into a new contract term, they will also charge you storage for every month through the balance of that contract term. So if you just renewed for another year, now you've got 12 months of storage that you're going to be responsible for. So keep that in mind as well.
yeah.
Go ahead, Rob.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Longer term contracts are always in your best interest. All of the vendors will tell you that the longer term your contract is, the more they can spread out some of those exit fees that they might be reimbursing for you. So if you look at a 5 or 10-year contract, your rates are going to be more competitive than if you're looking at just a 1, 2, or 3-year contract term. I also would suggest, if you know you're going to be able to destroy, ask for some allowances. Have those written into your contract because that can help decrease your cost. Storage providers will tell you, and I worked at them, historically, people do not use those allowances, so they're very willing to give those a lot of times because they don't think you're going to use them. So if you are asking for those, make sure you are putting it on your to-do list to follow up to make sure that you are using them. Just 2 more out boxes. If you currently have boxes checked out from your storage facilities, you are still being charged storage on those. Run a list of an inventory report with the status, take any box that's been checked out for a while and permanently remove it if it's not intending to go back. You're just wasting dollars if it's sitting at your office and they're still holding a space for it at the vendor. And then check invoices. Can't stress this one enough. I review invoices for all of our firms that we do business with, and the amount of inaccuracies is outstanding. As I mentioned before, reboxing, relidding, repairing now are all new ones. And I can tell you that you can opt out of reboxing. For relidding, you can ask them to put a limit of 10 on the relidding activities. And repairing is too new. I don't have any secrets on that one. But again, watch those invoices. Another one that I'm seeing pop up a lot is outside courier fees. So as they're using outside couriers more, they're not using their own trucks. They are now charging that back to firms, and it's just appearing as a line item on your invoice. So if you're just paying it and not looking over all those different line items, you might be paying things you shouldn't have.
Okay, great points, Deanna. Again, anyone who has any questions for Deanna on offsite record storage, please submit them in chat. And if we don't get to them today, which probably will not, we will follow up with you after this coffee break. So last thing we want to show you is that a lot of times we get asked, hey, how does my contract compare to other firms in the industry? And we, would have to request your contract, a couple months of invoices, sign an NDA, and we would come back and give you a benchmark on how your costs contracts compare to your competitors, to the legal market. Okay. It was a timely process. Also, too, some firms have in their contracts, which is kind of hard to believe, that they're not allowed to share their contracts outside the firm. So if you have that, if you allow that in there, then you should obey it. And next time around, make sure it's not in there. So what we developed, and I'm going to share the screen here, is an AI-based powered tool that will allow you to come to our website. We're also going to send the link out and enter the number of attorneys, your email, and it's going to give you a pretty accurate benchmark. Again, there's always little details here and there, how many services you got included, how many offices are underneath your contract. And this is going to really, all the different service areas that we offer will provide you a benchmark of how your contracts are stacking up. Now, this is called the Mattern Cost Savings Simulator, which is a mouthful to say the least. So for short term, we're calling it Matty. Okay. And here, when you go to Matty, again, this is going to be accessible through our website or through a separate link. It's going to ask you how many attorneys are in your firm. So I'm going to use 500. And then it's going to ask me for an email address to make sure I work at a firm. And if you don't work at a firm, or you put a Gmail account in there or something like that, it's going to pop up, kick you out. And here it's going to ask you, hey, what areas do you want to take a look at? And I'll choose outsourcing. And this is going to show you, what typically a 500 person attorney firm spends. We're saying about $2.5 million, and what you could save by going through a competitive process. And in this case, it's $510,000. So what we did to build this is, one, we fed all our information for the past 28 years into AI database. We had an AI developer develop this, that, hey, if someone's spending this prior to Mattern being involved, it will spend Y. And that's how we come up with projected savings. So if you want just a very quick, hey, here's how much I'm spending on offsite record storage, here's how much I'm spending on office supplies, just go to the Matty, and we'll give you a guideline on that. It doesn't do anything with contract terms. Also, too, someone did submit a chat question, and I will feed that in there to see what comes up with.
Rob, you shouldn't be asking your own questions in
I
chat.
should be asking. Again, if anyone goes out and bets money on this, can't blame me. Okay, at least we're honest. Matty can't provide anything on sporting events. But again, any of your contracts that you want to get a feel for where you're at from a spend viewpoint, this could provide it. Unfortunately, I actually, up against the clock, we have a whole bunch of questions that were submitted. We will follow up with you afterwards on the answers to those questions. Any additional questions for either Deanna or Ken in the areas of offsite or legal research, or any of the other areas that we're going to talk about on October 14th, please submit them. And again, you're going to get a link to Matty and use it. If there's any questions on that, love to hear them. So thank you very much for attending. We try to keep these at 45 minutes, and I see I'm right there. So look forward to seeing you on October 14th to cover the next series of topics on how to control your spend in those areas. Take care.